Have you ever wondered why the 30 Years' War was so important? Well then, let's begin. The deep tension that dragged Europe into war. Defining the 30 Years' War merely as a religious conflict fails to capture the full historical reality. Fought between 1618 and 1648, this great struggle represents one of the bloodiest manifestations of Europe's painful transition from a medieval world to the modern age. Under these conditions, the war erupted and gradually transformed into an uncontrollable catastrophe. The fire that ignited in Bohemia. The war began in Prague. In 1618, Protestant Bohemian nobles rose up against the emperor's Catholic representatives and threw them out of a castle window. This event is known in history as the Defenestration of Prague. This symbolic act of violence was, in reality, the explosion of long-suppressed political and religious tensions. Bohemia openly defied the emperor and elected a Protestant king. The Habsburgs viewed this challenge as an existential threat. The Bohemian resistance came to an end in 1620 with the Battle of White Mountain. The Catholic victory was not only military, but also deeply social in its consequences. Protestant elites were executed, lands were forcibly confiscated, and the region was systematically re-Catholicized. At this point, the conflict ceased to be a local rebellion and became an empire-wide war. Europe steps in. Denmark and Sweden. The suppression of Bohemia sent shockwaves through the Protestant world. This fear materialized in 1625 when Denmark entered the war. Although the Danish king presented himself as a protector of Protestantism, his true aim was to expand political influence in northern Germany. During this phase, Catholic forces held the upper hand, largely due to powerful armies built on mercenary systems. Denmark suffered heavy defeats and withdrew from the war in 1629. The true historical turning point came in 1630 with Sweden's intervention. The Swedish army employed some of the most modern military tactics of the era. While the war became more professional in military terms, it also grew far more devastating socially. The death of the Swedish king on the battlefield plunged the conflict back into uncertainty. The war would neither end in a swift victory nor return to its former balance. Wallenstein and the war becomes a system, one of the most distinctive features of the 30 Years' War. Separating it from other European conflicts was its transformation into an institutionalized system of destruction. At the center of this transformation stood one man, Albrecht von Wallenstein. Wallenstein was a general fighting on behalf of the Habsburg Emperor. But what set him apart was the system he created. His armies were not financed directly by the imperial treasury, but by the territories they occupied. This was a model almost without precedent in history. War was no longer won solely on the battlefield. It devastated every region it passed through, exhausted populations, and financed itself in the process. Wallenstein's forces consisted of hundreds of thousands of mercenaries. Their nationality, religion, or ideology was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was that the war continued. Because once it ended, the army would dissolve, and its source of livelihood would disappear. Historians describe this period as the darkest phase of the 30 Years' War. The conflict was no longer merely between states. It had become a military economic system. Villages were plundered, cities were extorted, and civilians were systematically exploited. Eventually, this system became a threat even to the emperor himself. Wallenstein's power grew so immense that his loyalty was questioned. In 1634, he was assassinated with the emperor's consent, the point where religion steps back. The French phase. France's entry into the war in 1635 revealed the true nature of the 30 Years' War. A Catholic state fighting against Catholic Habsburgs demonstrated that the conflict had moved beyond religious boundaries. At this stage, the war had become a full-scale European power struggle. States aligned themselves not according to faith, but according to interest. As the war dragged on, armies expanded, while resources steadily diminished. The most defining feature of this period was the immense suffering of civilians. Historical sources indicate that in some German regions, up to 1/3 of the population perished. Famine, epidemics, and constant looting became the war's most enduring legacy. Westphalia and the birth of modern Europe. The Peace of Westphalia, signed in 1648, was more than the end of a war. It marked the beginning of the modern international system. Through these treaties, the sovereignty of states was formally recognized. Religious coercion was largely curtailed. The political power of the Holy Roman Empire was significantly weakened. For historians, Westphalia represents the threshold at which the Middle Ages ended and the modern state system was born. The modern state emerged from its foundations. The consequences of a great war. The 30 Years' War stands as one of the most devastating conflicts in European history. Yet this destruction was not accidental. It was the inevitable outcome of long-standing political, religious, and economic tensions. This war teaches us one enduring lesson. States begin wars with ideals, but most often end them with interests.